All right, well, welcome to another flip lesson, math lesson for Mr. Moore's math class. Welcome in Mr. Rockenstein's class as well, and anybody else who has checked this out. Today, if you can guess by some of these symbols that we have around here, we are going to be studying percent. So, when we talk about percent, the things that we're going to be talking about is what is it, how do we use it, and then how do we calculate it, of course, because we're going to practice that. It is math after all. So, first of all, what is it? Percent is really just a decimal or fraction number where the denominators of all the numbers are 100. So what we mean by that is in order to be able to compare two numbers, we're going to make sure the denominators get to 100. And one way we can do this is by finding their percent. In fact, the Latin of percent means out of 100. And then how do we use it? Well, we use it by comparing numbers that are different. So when we have two different numbers, how can we compare them if they're different? Well, we figure out their percent, and that's what we're going to do. So examples of when we might use percent: sports, grades, comparing numbers of any type, interest, sales, money, things like that. Any of those would be examples of times to use percent. Here's the big one. How do we calculate percent? Well, there's two main steps. The first step is we make sure we have the number as a decimal, which means if it's a fraction, we're going to convert it to a decimal form, which of course we know how to do now. So the second step after we have it as a decimal is we're going to multiply that number, that decimal number, by 100, which really is just moving the decimal over to the right two spaces. And that final whole number, that final number we have after we do that, is our percent. So that's how we figure it out. So we're going to get right into it here, and we're going to do an example. So here we have this problem. We have the problem that says, let's say we have two kids who play on the same basketball team. One of them, Paige, has made 16 out of 31 baskets. Well, we can turn that into a fraction right away. What's 16 out of 31? That would be 16 out of or over 31. The other, Ashaya, has made 127 out of 300 baskets. Well, let's turn hers into a fraction as well. 127 out of 300. And it says, how can we compare them? Well, look at these two numbers. Is there any possible way to just look at them and compare? And there's no great way. They're different denominators. So one number is way bigger than the other number. If we just looked at that, we'd say, well, Ashaya has to have done better. She made 127, and Paige only made 16. But the best way to be able to compare them is to figure out their percent. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the calculator over here, and we're going to divide them just like we talked about. So our first step is divide. So I'm going to do 16 divided by 31. 16 divided by 31 equals, and we get this long decimal. We get 0.5161290322580. Long decimal. So now we have it in decimal form. Our second step was then we're going to multiply it by 100. So now if I take this number and I do times 100 equals, I get 51.6129. This is all of that. And really what we're looking for is those first two numbers, the whole numbers. So I'm going to say this is about 51%. And we could go even further. We could say it's 51.61 or anything like that. But for now, we're going to keep it simple and just say Paige is shooting 51% when it comes to baskets. Well, now let's see how Ashaya is doing. Now, if I take Ashaya's numbers and I do 127 divided by 300 equals, I get 0.423333, which is a repeating, of course. We all know that. And now my second step, I do times 100 equals, and it just moved the decimal over, I get 42.3. So that means Ashaya is shooting 42%. Well, which one is better? Obviously, 51% is better than 42%. It's much higher. So even though she has made way more baskets, she's shot a lot more too. And she only makes 42% of her shots, whereas Paige is making 51%. So you can see just by turning them into percent there, we're able to compare them exactly. We're going to do another problem. Here's another sample. It says, let's say you took two tests. On one of the tests, there were 32 questions, and you got 27 of them correct. So that would give us what fraction? That's right, 27 out of 32. That's what you got on your test. Test number one, let's call it. On the other test, there were 88 questions and you got 80 of them correct. So test number 2, we got 80 out of 88 correct. And that's test number 2. So how do you know your percent grade on each test and on which one you did better? Well, we just talked about how do we figure out percent. First step, divide. We need to get it into a fraction. So we're going to turn this to a fraction, which we know is by dividing. So I'm going to do 27 divided by 32 equals, and I get 0.84375. I'm going to write the whole thing down here. I get 0.84375. So that's it in decimal form. And now in order to turn this into a percent, I'm going to multiply times 100. I could also just look over here at the decimal and I could move it over 2 spots, which would give me 84%. But let's try it on the calculator just to make sure we're right. And look at that, we're correct. So really the exact percent I would get when I move that over, it's 84.375%. That's a pretty good grade. So now if I take this other one, 80 divided by 88, 80 divided by 88, I get 0.90909090. Well, we know that's a repeating, so we can just write the first two, 0.90, and then this is going to repeat. And we know that in order to figure out the percent, I can either multiply it times 100, which is really the same as moving my decimal over 2 spots. So I'm going to do it on the calculator, equals, and that's what the same thing I get. I get 90 point, and then that's repeating. So this is a 90.90 repeating percent, but we wouldn't do the repeating part when it comes to our percent. So we would just leave that there. So this is a 90%. The 80 out of 88 is 90%. The 27 out of 32 is 84%, which is a better grade. Well, the 90% is. That's an A minus. So nice job there. Now you're going to practice one on your own. And this one, I want you to finish this one and then turn it in tomorrow. Or you can do it on Moodle. But the question is, if you got 4 out of 5 correct on a test, but someone else got 8 out of 20, what percent did you each get? And then whose grade would be better? Whose percent grade would be better? So go ahead and make sure you follow the 2 steps we just talked about. First, you're going to turn it into a decimal, and then you're going to multiply times 100 to get your percent. Hope this makes sense to you. Hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing your answers tomorrow.